ऑडियो එක පොඩ්ඩක් ලැග් වෙනවද?
Through those tough times. I remember when I woke several years later, the morning after he died. The cloak didn't rush back that morning, but arrived in slow motion with a new kind of inescapable weight. Mr. Speaker.
I call on Vanushi Walters to make her maiden statement.
Ahu mai rangi maunga, mihi mai, karanga mai, tātou nā māngai o te motu. Nā kaitiaki o nā tika tangata, te atiawa tangata, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ayubowan, vanakkam. My congratulations, Mr. Speaker, on your reappointment. I want to acknowledge your guidance through the induction, and I look forward to your guidance this term. There's a moment just as you wake. It doesn't happen every morning, but on those mornings when something significant has changed in your life, there's an inch of time after waking where you take a breath before the cloak of your new identity washes back. It was there the morning after election with warp speed-like force and left me awash with gratitude for the trust placed in me as the first Labour Party member to hold the Upper Harbour seat. I can't claim the privilege of being the first MP of Sri Lankan descent. Thanks to the speedy work of the Parliamentary Library, I quickly discovered that privilege belongs to the Honourable Annette King. However, I am the first Sri Lankan-born member of New Zealand's Parliament, and I'm incredibly humbled to be joining a values-based, not to mention enormous Labour caucus. I'm also proud to serve under the leadership of the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern, or as my kids call our extraordinary Prime Minister, your work friend. She's someone I deeply respect and admire. That experience of the inch of time and the rush of a new cloak of identity have become markers for my memory. I felt the rush waking up as a 6-year-old in an apartment at the crest of the terrace, connecting with the fact that I was now not only a Sri Lankan but also a New Zealander, my family having arrived in 1987. I felt the rush waking up the morning after my mother told me Richard de Soysa's story. Richard was my father's second cousin, a journalist in Sri Lanka killed in 1990 as a result of his courageous criticism of the then government. The cloak that morning arrived like a wave of outrage. Surely people weren't being tortured and killed by their own governments. And if they were, the cloak demanded I do something about it. It was a story and a feeling that began a 27-year journey in human rights advocacy for me. There is still so much to be done for human rights protection in many countries around the world, because Manida Urimehel Ane Vurukum Sundamanadu Manava Hemikam Sialantama Aiti, which means in both Tamil and then Sinhala, human rights belong to all. The rush of the cloak was there when I first nervously woke up as a qualified lawyer. It was there the morning after my father, Jana Rajanayagam, had several strokes and heart attacks, after being the finance manager of the Upper Hutt City Council and then the North Shore City Council. In an instant, he was physically unable to work and thankfully received government support through those tough times. I remember when I woke several years later, the morning after he died. The cloak didn't rush back that morning, but arrived in slow motion with a new kind of inescapable weight. The inch of time and the rush of a new identity was there the morning I woke up after 2 hours of intermittent sleep and looked at the most miraculous thing, our first baby, and then our second, and then our third. The cloak on those mornings carried vibrant new colours I never could have imagined. That inch of time and the rush of the cloak is a marker of the human experience we all share. I look around at the diversity in this Parliament, which will serve us so well this term, but as well as our beautiful differences, we share so many remarkable similarities in human experience. During my time in community law, with Amnesty International and at the Human Rights Commission, I've had the privilege of hearing many people's stories. I often think about their mornings, what it might feel like to wake and take on the cloak of parenting and advocating for a child with special needs, or to wake and connect with the prison walls around you. In recent days, I've thought about what it's like for those who wake and reconnect with their health status, with their immigration status, with their employment status. We might not be able to relate to the weight of all the cloaks others wear, but that we can relate to that feeling from the inch of time to the rush of the cloak. It's our door to connection, conversation, understanding, and respect. In this House especially, we have an obligation to consider deeply the impact of everything we stitch to or fail to stitch to the cloaks that New Zealanders wear. Mr. Speaker, there is another experience we all share, and it's something described well through a conversation 2 of our boys had in the backseat of the car. We'd just come home from a concert and the conversation went a bit like this. Elliot, did you feel it? Luca, feel what? Elliot, the electricity. What they were discussing was that feeling you get when you hear that special piece of music or you're watching that movie and the storyline and music rise to catch your heart. We've all felt it. Some of us get to feel it often. I've felt it marching with women's rights activists in Nepal and Manila, watching a mum catch her breath with pride as her daughter speaks quietly but with conviction about being discriminated against during a mediation. The electricity didn't seem to stop when I stepped on board the majestic Rainbow Warrior 2 for an interview as a climate campaigner, and it was there, buzzing through a pile of hundreds of letters that sat on the floor of a hotel lobby in Mexico, saved by a former prisoner of conscience, sent by strangers to win him his freedom, and they had. It was there with unhelpful giddiness when I walked in to sit my final exams at Auckland University and then at Oxford. The electricity danced across the room in Johannesburg as young human rights activists talked, cried, and shared visions of hope about the future of human rights. It was there embodying possibility, listening to stories about my great-grandmother, Nasim Sarvanamuttu, the second woman to be elected to the State Council of Ceylon in 1931. This is a feeling we should all have in the work we do and in the relationships we hold. This is the great ambition for all New Zealanders, not only to ensure that we look out for each other when times are tough and we must, but to support and connect people with the things that will bring that electricity. Young people should know that as we address the challenges of the coming years, there is a place for their hearts as well as their heads and their hands in the future of employment. When I was a young person, I went to hear Dame Kath Tizard speak at a women's rights conference. She talked about visiting a primary school where a 5-year-old boy puts up his hand and asks, "When you were young like us, did you want to be Governor-General?" And she replied no and asked him, "Why do you want to be Governor-General when you grow up?" To which the little boy spat out, "No, I'm not a girl." While Dame Kath was New Zealand's first female Governor-General, to this little boy, she was the only one he'd known. And the story has always reminded me that not only can great change happen in one generation, but time and time again, it does. And there is much that still needs to be done. We have an obligation to continue to address racism and discrimination. Where voices aren't represented at decision-making tables, we have an obligation to shake the tables. We must not only hear the loud and organised, but fiercely listen for piercing silences and work to bring the marginalised and disempowered from the periphery to the centre. We have an obligation to protect all human rights, including economic, social and cultural rights. And because rights are meaningless without the ability to access them, we have a connected obligation to ensure sound access to advocacy and to the courts. We have an obligation to do more and then more again to address climate change. We have an obligation as we turn the corner towards the 200-year anniversary of the signing of Te Tiriti to fulfil its articles. We have an obligation to examine the edges of policy and law where education impacts justice, where justice impacts employment, where employment impacts health, and design bridging policy solutions that recognise lives aren't lived in select committee silos, they're just lived. Because this is how we really disrupt the churn of poverty. For a month at the start of 2017, I went to work barefoot. I had heels in my bag, just in case I had to explain why the General Manager of Youth Law Aotearoa hadn't bothered to construct an entire work outfit. But other than that, I went barefoot. The intention to connect more meaningfully with where I was, and the barefoot worked. I thought more carefully about the land, the building, the community, and I noticed things on walks I never otherwise would have taken. I say this to perhaps warn the wonderful people of Upper Harbour that you may see me doing the same over the coming years. Don't worry, there's a method to what might seem a bit of madness. Upper Harbour, what a huge privilege to have your trust. I intend to be a strong voice for you on the things that matter, including transport, community safety, housing, employment, and supporting our small and medium-sized businesses. Therese, my husband, I suspect there aren't enough thank yous for all that's to come. I've learned and loved so much because of you. The way you slow your pace to keep company with the slowest walker, the way you sit in silence considering a question with care before you respond, and for all you are to our family, including the dad jokes, the music, the calm sea. To our boys, Elliot, Luca and Sasha, for the electricity and brightly coloured cloaks you've brought to our lives, thank you. To my family and friends, thank you, but especially to Ammi, my mum, Prathiva Fern Rajanagam, for the visible support and for all the invisible support that makes standing here possible. My deepest thanks to Claire, Jessie and Antonia for nurturing the seed of an idea. To our Upper Harbour team, especially to Andy Hopkins. Where are you? Jan, Dev, Lissay, Chris, Ros, Brad, to Liata, Merisaresa, Leilua, Mark, Marion, Craig, Jade, Vivian, Robin, Noy, Shane, Brooke, Brendan, thank you. To Sir Bob Harvey, Chris Carter and Lal Senaratna, my thanks for your mentoring and your belief in me and the campaign. I want to make special mention of my early mentors, Lucretia Seals, whose keen intellect was matched by her courage. Margie Taylor, Sid Simpson, Pākia Sodhi Sarvanamuttu, all of whom have had a significant impact on the decisions I've made in my journeying. To the parliamentary service staff and all who work in these buildings, who play such a critical role in our democracy, this work we do is only possible because of your hard work, care, and I suspect often your good humour. Finally, to my parliamentary colleagues from all walks of political thought, I suspect there'll be times when we glance across the room and connect unexpectedly on a value that brings all of us to this place. We have a collective obligation to nurture that. While the reality of politics is our corners and a 3-year term, at least for now, the truth of sustainable and significant change requires that we hold on to those moments of connection and construct some political scaffolding around the values and ideas we all need to take root and to grow for Aotearoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Order. Order.
Mr. Speaker.
I call Tangi Utakere for his maiden statement.
Hello, everyone. Welcome all of you to the session. We are really excited to have all of you. And since Madam Vanushi Walters is also here, I just want to make sure that tech is working fine. She had dropped us a message. Madam, am I audible to you?
Kia ora Mahima, yes,
Kia
you
ora.
are. Me?
Okay, fantastic. Just give us 2 minutes. So I'm gonna check with Rotarian Lucian. Are we all good? Are we technically sound? And I want to check with Rotarian Marshad Bari as well.
Yes, Mahima.
Okay. So
Okay.
is Rotarian Lucian okay with his technical side? Is he able to join us? Okay. Let's check. Just bear with us just to get technicalities in line, and then we'll be good to go. We have 2 minutes before we start off. Our technical team, Talib, can you check on Rotarian Lucian, please?
Yes, I'm on it.
Thank you. Okay.
Mahima, Lucian will be joining in a minute.
Okay,
so
fantastic. Thank you very much.
Right, yeah.
Okay. So we have just 1 more minute. I think we are all good to go, set to go. And thank you very much for joining us, everyone. So let us begin the session. And we are really happy that we are live on Facebook. We are here on Zoom. And we are also going live on YouTube as well for the general public. And it's a great honor and privilege to have Madam Vanushi Walters with us and all the distinguished Rotarians as well. Just to let you know about the house rules for the day. So initially, you would realize that all of you are muted unless you're a co-host or in the organizing committee. You've been muted just to make sure that everybody would get the best experience out of this session. So if and when required, your mics will be unmuted. And yeah, we have, for the question session, we have many questions from which we have selected because we don't have all the time. We have 1 hour exactly for this session. So we have selected a couple of questions, sorry, and we will be discussing those questions with Madam Vanushi Walters. And if you have a really important question that you need to ask, please do use the comment section and we can let you ask the questions depending on the relevance and the importance of the question. So with that note, let us go through the intention of the session. As you can see, it's about youth and it's about integrity. As you know, youth is full of energy. They are the drivers of any country. I mean, they're full of energy and they're full of potential, and integrity is something that everybody can use to focus that energy towards their own growth as well as a growth of an entire nation. So with that idea in our mind, we invited Madam Vanushi Walters. She's the first ever Sri Lankan born parliamentarian to the New Zealand Parliament. And before we start the session, now let me invite President of Rotary Club of Colombo North, Rotarian Lucian Pereira, to address everyone, to welcome everybody on behalf of the Rotary family of Colombo North. Rotary Lucian.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you're
Yeah,
very much
thank
audible.
you, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry for the initial glitch. A very good morning and a good day to everyone. And on behalf of the Rotary Club of Colombo North and our associates in Rotaract and Interact, in fact, the family of Rotary International Colombo North, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Honorable Vanushi Walters on the subject of youth and integrity. I think the topic that she has chosen is very apt in the context of the issues that this country is facing currently and over the past few years. There's been a big vacuum in the item of integrity among our politicians over the years, and the fact that we have celebrated 70 years of 73 years of independence has not brought forth the sort of results that the population in Sri Lanka had been awaiting. And the unfortunate fact is that the leadership skills of most of our politicians lacks integrity. And I think politicians of the caliber of Honorable Vanushi Walters can teach an abject lesson to the politicians over here in this area. And I'm sure our youngsters would definitely benefit from the subject matter that she would be dealing with today. So on behalf of our Rotary family of Colombo North, once again, let me warmly welcome Honorable Vanushi Walters to this session, and I'm sure all of us who joined today will benefit greatly from the insights that she's going to give us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Lucian. Yes, so our focus is youth and focus is energy, energy, youth, and the integrity aspect of the youth and how important it is to us. And so before I hand over and give the introduction to Madam Vanushi Walters, let me ask all of us to get into the right, correct mindset for us to be really, really receptive. Let us close our eyes for a moment and be thankful to our families and to the nature and to our countries, show gratitude, fill our hearts with gratitude before we enter into the situation, enter into this discussion particularly, which I think is pretty important at this time especially. So let us do that. Let's take just 30 minutes, 30 seconds, mind you, very sorry, and just pay gratitude to wherever we belong, to our parents, to our families, and to our nature, which provides us with all this for us to live. So let's pay a little gratitude, and then we'll follow up with Madam Walter's introduction. Okay, thank you everyone. So this lady doesn't actually need a particular introduction because most of the people here are well aware of her. But as per formalities, I will speak a few words introducing her. So she family moved to New Zealand in 1987, if I'm correct. And she's currently the parliamentarian representing the Upper Harbour seat here in Auckland, New Zealand. And her passion is mostly on human rights. She's a human rights lawyer. And during the discussion, she specifically mentioned that she has a lot of passion towards children and the youth. So that is spot on our behalf. So that's a passion. And she was also a general manager in youth law at Tuera, which is a company providing legal consultations. And she is currently the deputy chairman of the Justice Select Committee in the Parliament. And she's also a mother of three. She's a very busy mother as well, keeping everything going. And I was told by Rotarian Asoka Piris, my former big boss, that in 1973 and 1976, Mr. Richard de Souza, a cousin of your father, I believe, yes, he was the best actor of the Shakespeare drama competition, which is a big event that has been hosted and organized by the Rotary Club of Colombo North. So in a way, we are connected to your story, the Rotary Club of Colombo North, which is really interesting in a way, because here you are today, and there is some connection. After all, it's a small world. So with that brief introduction, Madam Walters, it's all yours. Take it away. Thank you.
Ayubowan, Vanakkam, Assalamu alaikum, kia ora tātou. Firstly, my thanks to Lucian and the Colombo North Club for hosting us today and for the warm welcome, and also to Mahima for that introduction and for all your organising behind the scenes. I know these don't just pop up, that there is a lot of organising. I have to, before I do my intro, I feel like I have to explain why I'm a little overdressed for a Zoom call. So after this event, I'm heading out to the Auckland Tamil Association, who are holding a New Year's celebration. So that's one thing to explain. The other is a warning that Mahima mentioned. I have 3 little boys, so hopefully one of them doesn't pop through the back door just there. But if they do, you've been warned. Such is the life of a mother who's also a politician. So thank you very much for making the time to have me to speak on this very important topic. Mahima mentioned that children's rights and young people in general are very close to my heart. For a number of years, I've worked in the children's rights field. I thought what I'd do in terms of communicating my values-based journey and what I believe is important in terms of sticking to your values as you embark on a career and find your leadership journey is tell some of the stories that have been important to me in my life as I've made decisions. Now, some of you may have watched my maiden speech or have heard me speak before, and I often begin talks about my journey with the story of Richard de Soysa, but that's not actually where my journey in values began. So I thought I'd start somewhere else today. And it's actually back when I was about 3 or 4 years old, because people often ask me whether I wanted to be a lawyer, whether I wanted to be a politician when I was very young, and I didn't. I wanted to be an accountant. And the reason was that my father was an accountant, and he was someone who I had a lot of respect for as a 3, 4, 5-year-old. But I think the first thing that was important to me in terms of fostering a belief in myself and a belief in the values I held were my parents, because they always said to me that I could do anything that I wanted to, that I should always be curious about life and find what excited me and what I was passionate about, and that anything was possible. And that was a theme or some mentoring that was echoed throughout my life. Again, at university, when I remember a significant professor at Oxford saying to me post-law school, I was doing my postgrad, he said, "Don't believe that you need to go into a law firm and spend 4 to 5 years there to be respected and to be trusted. Follow your head. Again, be curious about life and about the problems of the world. Follow your heart and be passionate and take that passion with you to solve those problems. And when you feel that it's time to move on, whether it's been 3 months or 6 months or a year." And he finished by saying, at some stage in your late 30s, reflect on what you've done and the journeys you've been on, and then decide what it is you'd like to contribute to the world, make a plan, and then do it in your 40s and 50s. So without telling you some of the stories that I'm about to in terms of my life, those have been some of the important messages of mentoring that have sat with me. And had I not had that, I think a lot of the stories and things that happened to me would have been just that, stories that I could have left behind. So the first story that was important to me was absolutely Richard's, and that was told to me when I was about 12 years old by my mother, who said that my dad had the second cousin, Richard de Soysa, a journalist in Sri Lanka, who was very passionate himself about human rights and who, because of his outspoken words, lost his life essentially in 1990. But then what she told me was that his mother moved to London and became a really strong human rights activist. And it was actually her story, as well as Richard's, that made a huge impact on me. It was not just the outrage I felt hearing about what had happened to Richard, but actually that you could do something about it. So from the age of 12 or 13, I joined Amnesty International, and from there got involved in leadership groups, eventually with the New Zealand Amnesty entity. And that was really through what I would call the generosity of a thoughtful introduction. And I think this is another point maybe for ethics and values, and that there is so much power within the connections we have and the communities of people we know, that sometimes to do the best thing in terms of our values can be as simple as introducing 2 change makers, which was what happened to me. From there, I got very involved in the global amnesty movement at a time when there were many civil wars that were happening around the world, where women's rights were still an issue that were only being fought largely by women's organisations. And Amnesty took on the part of that mantle of fighting for women's rights as well. So I did that by night. By day, I was finishing my law degree at Auckland, and I was working for organisations like the Auckland Refugee Council, like the Children's Commission. And eventually, when I left law school, I was still at Amnesty, but I took on a role in public law. I've throughout my career had many, many different roles. I went on to work for Greenpeace New Zealand, and in litigation work with the Human Rights Commission and in private practice. And I spent 9 years in community law. And a lot of people say to me, well, those are quite different roles. But for me, actually, there's been a strong values thread through all the different roles I've had. And it's often not been about the titles or the positions that I've held, but about exactly what that professor encouraged me to do, which was to be outraged and passionate and to chase that, to be curious about the solutions, and to hold those titles very loosely. So to focus on the work. In many ways, the role I've taken on now as a parliamentarian is very similar to what I was doing at the Human Rights Commission or as an independent lawyer. It has been, as it is now, about ensuring that we have a strong human rights architecture. Before I talk about integrity and ethics and some of the challenges I think our young people are facing I might also just speak briefly about why I got into politics, because I suspect there are a number of people on this call who are working with charitable organisations, not-for-profits. That was my home. I always felt that I would always work for not-for-profits and charitable organisations, and that my role as an advocate was really to hold government to account. But two things happened which changed that for me. As I mentioned, for 9 years, I worked in community law. And during the 9 years I was there, I went from being a lawyer to the senior solicitor and then the general manager. And over the 9 years, there was a Labour Party backbencher who used to come and visit us every year to talk about children's rights. You all may know her. Her name is Jacinda Ardern. She's now our Prime Minister. But back then, she was a Labour Party backbencher. And I was always extremely impressed with two things about her. One, just her intellect and her depth of thought in terms of the issues affecting children here in New Zealand. But the second was something which I hope is now not unique for politicians, but certainly to me felt unique at the time. And it was this. I had a range of people in the room who I'd bring out to meet her, from volunteers and interns to lawyers to board members who were working in a very senior way in private practice. She treated everyone in the room equally and with respect. And she listened to everyone's views with interest. And you could see that everyone's views genuinely held equal weight with her. And I was always very impressed with that. Something else happened during those 9 years that I was at community law. So community law, just to explain, is a free legal service where we give children and young people legal advice and representation when they need it here in New Zealand. During those 9 years, the national government were in place and they froze our funding, which meant that I had to move our premises to be able to retain all my staff. And we really had to be creative in terms of maintaining the services to those young people. And I just thought, this isn't the way that you ensure access to justice. And I knew that it was time for me to join the Labour Party and to become more active. And that's really why I made the decision to join the party. I made the decision to stand for politics, largely because of my view that when COVID hit New Zealand and the rest of the world, that we were about to face some of the biggest human rights challenges that the world has seen in immigration, in housing, in employment, and in many other areas. And I think that what we've seen is that very much playing out. And so I felt that if there was ever a time to be involved on the inside, this was it. And then I think the last question I often get asked is what it's like to be a new member of Parliament. And I always say it's non-stop. So the day after the election, you get a call from Parliamentary Services and they say, congratulations, now hop on a plane, you're coming down to Wellington. And it's all go from then. And really, it's been an incredibly busy time. But I think what's kept me very much grounded is what I said earlier, which is I don't see this as a distinctly different or new role. It's a much more visible role, absolutely. But in many ways, it's doing the same work for human rights that I have been for the last 2 decades. And I think what I've appreciated is going into Parliament with a group of individuals in government who also share the values that I do. So I just want to turn now to some of the reasons why I think young people, but actually all of us, sometimes do a disservice to our values when we go into volunteering or we go into jobs. I think sometimes there's a sense of ambition. I think sometimes we do a disservice to our values because of curiosity. I'll explain these in a moment. I think sometimes we do a disservice to our core values because we have a deep sense of wanting to belong. I think sometimes we do a disservice because there's a sense of exhaustion. I think sometimes it's about immediate reward as opposed to holding out for greater things down the road. And I think the other thing is what I would call holding our values in our pockets. And I'll just briefly explain all those. But Mahima, do cut me short if I'm going over time at any stage. So ambition first. As I mentioned, for me, my view is that the position of being an MP doesn't pull you away from your values, or it shouldn't. It should be a vehicle to allow you to do justice to them. And I've always really loved that quote that goes, there are leaders and then there are those who lead. We follow leaders essentially because they hold positions, often because they hold positions over us. But we follow those who lead because they inspire us, because they take risks often, and they try new things. And I think sometimes we're too quick to decide that leaders are those who hold titles and positions, when I would bet there are many people in this room who we would qualify as leaders who don't hold those titles. So the first thing is, in terms of ambition, I would really encourage those of you who are thinking about that leadership journey to think about leadership a little bit differently than you might have in the past. The second thing I spoke about is curiosity. I do think sometimes we can have a set of values as we begin a journey in volunteering or in pursuing a career about human rights or about a cause, and then just be curious about what it might be like to have a role that didn't touch on any of those things. What would it be like if you didn't have to spend your weekends volunteering, or if you went entirely into the corporate sector? And I know there are a number of corporates who do a great amount of social good, but what would it be like just to be in that space without having an obligation on the side? And to be quite honest, I don't think that there's anything wrong with curiosity. I myself have been in corporate law for a year, and I tried it and it didn't work. I was in insurance litigation for a year, and what I found was I was just pulled to do more and more volunteering in the evenings. But what I would say, when you're curious about doing other things that might pull you away from your core values, make sure you know what's black and white to you. What are the lines you won't cross? And where is your grey? Where are the areas that you're happy to explore? The third thing that I think often pulls people away from a sense of wanting to do justice to their values set is belonging. And this can be belonging in the short term, so just wanting to give in so you're part of that greater group, or it can be buying into what you have been told or what you've observed as a natural path for life. So I used to talk to people when I was in my teens who were in their 40s and 50s about this lack of people volunteering in their 30s to 40s, or a lack of people who are engaged in social governance work in their 30s and 40s, because there's a sense that you do it when you're young, you're an activist when you're young, and then you live your life, and then you come back at an older age and you give back. And I really want to challenge that. I think that it's absolutely possible to bring your values along with you in the choices you make along the way. I would say, as a mother of 3, there is no good time to have a baby. There is no good time to get married. There is no good time to do your postgrad studies. There is no good time to take that complex, difficult job. I think I got engaged and married and then headed off to Oxford to do my master's. I remember being very pregnant with my eldest son. This would have been 10 plus years ago, and in Turkey at an international human rights amnesty meeting. I remember being very pregnant with my middle son and taking on the role of general manager of Youth Law Aotearoa. And I remember being 6 months pregnant with my youngest son and being in Geneva at the United Nations hearing on New Zealand and how well we were doing for children's rights. And I was there as an observer to ensure that the government were reporting appropriately. There isn't a good time to do all those things. You can weave your life in with your values. But I would say I've been very lucky and fortunate in having an extremely supportive family around me. And this is the other point I want to make about leadership and belonging. I think when we think about leaders, we often think about individuals, but the circumstances of leadership are such that require support. That's, in my view, unconditional. You need the environment around you that allows you to be in that space. And that doesn't just magically happen. I do think there's a need for conversations, for openness, for honesty, and for a degree of planning around there. But it's all possible. And I would say don't buy into the idea that you need to put your values on hold to pursue a career and then come back to it. The next point was exhaustion. And a lot of the questions I get, they don't ask me about exhaustion, but you can hear it in the tone of the question. Like, what should I do if I've tried and tried about this issue and I feel like I'm going nowhere? Is it time to give up? And what I usually say is, it's absolutely not time to give up, but it is time to have a break. And I think a lot of people who are extremely passionate about issues, who've seen the impacts of issues firsthand, find it very difficult to take a break or put any semblance of balance into their lives. Some of the most passionate people I know are some of the worst at this, which means that I think we need to be actively ensuring that we do it much more frequently. It allows you to have a lifelong career where you are passionate about what you do. And this ties to the next point, which is about immediate reward. So stepping away from your values because you can get something else which will give you an immediate reward. I've had many years with not-for-profit organisations in community law where I was paid possibly about a third of a private lawyer's salary. And I can't tell you with honesty that I never considered going into private practice, especially as we had growing expenses with children, looking to purchase a house, and all those things that come with getting a little bit older. But again, I do think that it's possible with balance and with planning to be able to achieve what you want to achieve, and still have the family life that you want to. I think it's also possible to integrate fun into jobs that have a purpose. Many people say to me, you know, it's so easy to focus on what's fun and doing what's fun now instead of what's important. And I often say to them, but if what you're doing, if what you're working at now isn't bringing you some sense of joy and fulfillment, even if it is important, you're not the right person to be doing that job. And that's hard to hear, but I do think it is important to find something that brings meaning to your life, that is purposeful, but also that brings you joy, and is absolutely important to weave that into the causes that we are working on, to the entities that we're setting up. I recall being at a Greenpeace Christmas party where the Christmas party was we all caught a boat out to an island, planted trees for the day, and then had a very easy, simple picnic. And it was joyous and it was purposeful. And reflecting back on my last week, I think when you think of MPs in Parliament, you possibly imagine them constantly at their desks and working from the crack of dawn into the night. That does happen. It does happen, especially when we're in Parliament. But we also do take time out because we know that you need to have balance in your lives. Last week, I was at a Buddhist temple in the North Shore early morning on the Sunday to celebrate New Year's with them. I then went to a women's rights conference to talk about women's empowerment, and I took my two youngest sons with me. The following day, I took the morning off and went to a trampoline park and jumped up and down for about an hour with my kids, and it was glorious. And then that afternoon, I looked at constituent issues about all sorts of things that affect the constituents in Upper Harbour. And then later in the afternoon, I attended a select committee for the Justice Select Committee that I'm the deputy chair of. So don't forget to be whole people in your lives as well. The last one I wanted to talk about is something I call keeping our values in our pockets. And I think those of us who are very values driven, who weave it into our lives, often say things like, we hold very tightly to our values, and we hold very strongly to our values when we're having to make a decision. We go back to our set of values and then we decide what we're going to do. And I'm going to ask you to question that a little bit, because I don't believe that values should sit in pockets as a set. I think values lie more in rivers than lakes. So they shouldn't be stagnant. They should be living. They should be absorbing what's happening around them. They should be growing and evolving as the challenges of our world change. And I think too often in the past, what we've done so too well is hold on really tightly to values that we've drawn dark lines around. And what we ought to be doing more is adapting them, holding them in our hands, yes, but turning them over and examining whether they're still fit for purpose. With challenges like climate change, with challenges like child poverty here in New Zealand, with challenges like COVID, sometimes the values that we've kept in our pockets, it's not that they're no longer fit for purpose, but they certainly need to be re-examined to see how we're going to evolve and live them in a new kind of way. So perhaps that's a good place for me to close off. I know there are some questions, so I do want to save some time for those. Shall I hand back to you, Mahima?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Some of the material really struck on us, like not trying to hold on to the title, but focus more on the work. Let's make perfect sense. And yes, very practical indeed. Thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. We were supposed to take a little break between the sessions, but this is becoming interesting. So let's not break the flow. Let's continue if that is not a problem with the others. So values, Madam, can you elaborate a little bit on values for our youth? What type of values do you actually give an example? What type of values do you adhere? And what are the values that you are willing to adopt? If you can give us an example.
Absolutely. I actually think one of the things I've always valued the most is hope and having a sense of hope. And maybe I'll tell a short story, which those of you who watched my maiden speech might know, but it's always meant a lot to me, which was hearing Dame Kath Tizard speak. She was New Zealand's first Governor-General in New Zealand, first female Governor-General. And she talked about visiting a primary school where a 5-year-old boy puts up his hand and asks, when you were young like us, did you want to be Governor-General? And she replied no, and then asked him, why do you want to be Governor General when you grow up? And this little boy just spits out no. And when she asks him why, he said, I'm not a girl. And I've always really loved that story because it said to me that although we think that things are hard to change, and many are, that actually time and time again change does happen in the world. She was our first female Governor General, but to this little boy, she was the only one he'd known. And I think without that sense of hope that our work, our advocacy, our activism, that lawmaking, that talking to politicians, submitting to select committee, that lobbying, that campaigns can bring about change, then we don't have the actions that follow. So hope is absolutely fundamental for me. I think also integrity in terms of how you go about your job. And integrity to me means a number of different things. It means ensuring that I'm being professional in terms of the role of MP. So not being unduly influenced in ways that I shouldn't be, but also being open to listen to new ideas, to being accountable in terms of my role and how I'm carrying out my role, but accountable in all aspects of my parliamentary life, which includes financial accountability. Who's sending me donations? Where am I agreeing to speak? Who am I saying yes to? Who am I saying no to? A lot of the things that Transparency International speak to in terms of the integrity of the political process. I think there are values that are very basic to all of us that I've seen play out as we've seen COVID hit around the world. So here in New Zealand, when we went into level 4 lockdown, what we saw was a lot of community organisations reaching out to provide support to those elderly people in the community who couldn't get out to get food and other supplies, really looking out for each other. So it's at a baseline, it is that sense of providing care for others around you and also for the environment we live in.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And another thing that I want to harp a little bit more on is purpose. What is your purpose? That is part of most of the questions from the youth as well. So on one side, you were talking about how, if I translate it, how to be gentle but firm when it's required, when it comes to dealing with the outside world, so that you hold your integrity. And the other side of things is, what is your purpose and how aligned are you with that purpose? Can you give us a little bit of elaboration on that, please?
That's a great question. I think the second part of that question is tricky. So what is my purpose? I think for me, what I would like to see is not just a New Zealand where human rights are respected, where everyone's human rights are respected, but a world where that's true. Which is obviously a huge vision. I've worked on parts of that in the different roles I've held, but ultimately that is the purpose that I work for. Am I aligned to it is more complex, because I think with my role, I've spoken to one of them, which is the Deputy Chair of the Justice Select Committee. I also sit on the Regulations Review Committee, who review things like the COVID orders. I'm the chair of the Multicultural Caucus for Labour, and I'm an electorate MP, so serving the people of Upper Harbour in terms of their needs as well. And so what I find is that what I sometimes say to some people is it would be very easy to spend the next 2.5 years moving sand across the beach. And what I mean by that is there are so many issues out there that individuals are facing in the Upper Harbour community, but across New Zealand, and issues that as a community lawyer, I desperately want to help each and every one of them with. However, that also takes time, and it takes time away from identifying some of those bigger what I would call bolder issues. And so what I would like to do is make sure I take time to identify what are the, one or two big human rights issues that I'm well aligned to contributing to in terms of making change. So that's possibly within the justice space, given my role there, and it's also possibly within the multicultural community space. And that's really the two areas that I'm looking to in terms of some of the proposals that I'm bringing to the table.
Okay, yeah. So human rights in an international level, that's globally, that's your purpose. And you're trying to aligning yourself, I can understand, must be really tough with multiple roles. But at the end of the day, all your mentality is focused towards that, which has been the case throughout your life, I guess.
Yeah, it has. And I mean, of course, given I'm here in New Zealand, there is a strong focus on what's happening in New Zealand. And there are very live human rights discussions that are happening here, including on things like discrimination, hate speech versus free speech, for example. So no doubt that will be a focus for me over this term in Parliament. But that broader sense of human rights across the world, absolutely, yeah.
So we promised that we would let a couple of our audiences ask questions. Janiti has a question. Janiti, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question, please. Thank you.
Yes, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
My question for you is, first of all, you're such a great inspiration. I mean, you're a mother of 3 and also a member of the Parliament. I'd love to know how, as a lady, how you balance and manage schedules to be this great multitasker you are.
Thank you, Janathy, for the question. Again, I have to go back to the village that is our family. So just outside the door back here is my husband, who's keeping 3 very active boys fairly quiet at the moment. So he's a lawyer as well, but we're very thankful that he's able to work from home. So he has quite a lot of flexibility. And we made a family decision when I spoke about my intention of considering becoming an MP, about what that would mean for the family. So he's incredibly supportive. He always has been. But I also have to say my mother has been a huge support. So my mother lives with us, and so she's almost second mum to the boys when I'm in Wellington, especially. So it is hugely that family support. A lot of people have said to me that it takes about a year to get into a routine of how it's going to work for your family. So I expect we've still got some learning to do. We're only halfway through that so far. But I've found that taking the boys with me to Wellington sometimes, to meetings, is fantastic, because not only do I get to spend time with them while I'm attending some of the events, but I really love the idea of them understanding what politics is, what democracy is, and feeling comfortable in Parliament. I have to say it is extraordinary how many young children there are who now run around the halls of New Zealand Parliament. It is a really extraordinary place to be, and as it should be, in my view. So I'm hopeful that New Zealand can be a bit of an example on that front.
Yes. So support from the family is fundamentally important in that case, as you rightly said. So yeah. And let's go to Rotarian Shriyanta, one of our most veteran Rotarians from our Rotary Club. Rotarian Shriyanta, are you there?
Rotarian Shriyanta, you had to unmute.
Yes, sir.
Sylvia, not.
All right. Okay.
Okay. Yes. Audible.
May I first congratulate Ms. Walters on a very articulate and a thought-provoking speech. I congratulate her also on her appointment to the Parliament. My question: we are today in a world that is totally engulfed by technology. In our youth, which was many, many decades ago in my case, if you saw the young people, they were always bunched and hunched over books from which we drew our inspiration. We got our primary ideas, the curiosity, the belonging, the leadership values that we inculcated were primarily from books. But today, when I look at youth, I see them totally bobbed over, engulfed in either a phone or an iPad. And this instrument, which is supposed to give us a lot of freedom, time to stand and stare, seems to have completely taken over our lives. What would you think, Ms. Walters? Where does technology interact with the youth of today? Does it give them time to have the values that you have been talking about?
Thank you, Sriyantha, and for your kind words as well. It's not lost on me that we're all on a Zoom call as well. So I think that there are definitely some benefits, and I do think that it is changing the way the world operates and allowing some extraordinary interactions that otherwise couldn't happen. But I, as a parent as well, I hear you in terms of managing my almost 10-year-old who possibly now is hunched over a computer in the other room. My view is I'm not so concerned about information. I think the flow of information is actually becoming in many ways more rich, more nuanced, and is reaching parts of the world that information wouldn't otherwise get to. I think that's a positive. Where I do have concerns is more about relationships and young people's ability to be connected in a meaningful way with the people around them. And this is something that we've been speaking about in New Zealand just in terms of mental health. I think it came to the fore for us during the COVID lockdowns when a lot of people were reporting feeling more disconnected, more lonely, and more distant and separated from the things that brought them purpose. And so in some ways, I think there was a learning moment there that hopefully we can learn from. Here in New Zealand, we've put in quite a massive investment in mental health and in terms of encouraging young people to connect physically as well as online. And I do think that that needs to happen at all levels, so at schools as well as they get older through universities and beyond. But I don't think it's a case of minimizing the ability to connect online. I think it's about more than information. It's about relationships. In my view, the best way that we can encourage people to connect is by making that a part of what we actively teach young people. I think there's an assumption that people know how to form meaningful relationships, how to traverse relationships as you get older and they grow and change and become different. And there's an assumption that we all know how to do that even with new technologies. That is absolutely not the case. So in my view, it's about investing and teaching those skills to children and young people and supporting face-to-face activities as well as online learning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. So with that, I would move into, we have heaps of questions, which I'm trying to select and go through and go one by one, but I will prioritize based on your speech as well. I'll cut some of them because you've already answered during your speech. So one of the main questions that one of our youth have asked, how important is integrity in terms of public communication?
I think it's fundamental. I think for me, in terms of what I learned as a new baby politician, campaigning for the first time in a public campaign this time around, is how important being authentic is. So rather than even just saying integrity, I would say being authentic. So bringing your whole self into discussions, including the flaws that you have as well, the aspects that you're working on, I think is absolutely important in terms of public discussion. So I think we need those who are in leadership roles to demonstrate that, to allow others to replicate that. And what I mean by that is another interesting experience I've had as a new politician is observing the comments that come through on Facebook posts. Now, I don't know if any of you have sat down and looked at a controversial politician's Facebook page or Twitter feed and the comments that stream after that, but I can tell you something that's probably not surprising, that there often isn't a lot of integrity and sometimes not even a lot of thought that goes into some of those comment feeds. And maybe this is playing on the question that we were just asked earlier. So I do think it's important, but in my view, the way to regulate most of that is not through law or policy. It's actually demonstrating best practice. And that is very much how the Labour Party ran our campaign in the last election. We all brought our authentic selves, and it wasn't about critiquing any other party. It was about bringing the values that we had to the table and having a good conversation around those ideas. And I think when you start demonstrating that, you bring other people along with you. So a lot of people also ask me, how do you convince someone who doesn't agree with your values or belongs to another party that your idea is the correct idea? How do you sort of win the battle, people ask? And I don't think it's about winning the battle. So in my experience, we work with colleagues from across the House and other select committees, so the National Party Act and the Greens and the Māori Party. In my view, it's about gaining their respect. And the way you gain respect is actually through what our Prime Minister often says, by treating people kindly and with respect, and then bringing solid ideas to the table that you're willing to hold in your hand and turn around with them as well. And once you do that, you'll find that the other side, if you will let down their own guard and will start replicating the way in which you're having a conversation too.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. And that open-mindedness would, in fact, I think, would lead to a better solution at sometimes with a collective effort, right? So.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely think so. Having said that, I do think we face challenges. And again, just riffing off the previous question, I think there are issues in terms of fake news that today's generation of citizens face in a very different way than has been experienced in the past. I think we have issues of hate speech online, which are being faced in a very different way by this generation of citizens globally than they have in the past. So there are things that need to be combated with policy and law. But for the most part, in terms of trying to encourage rational, respectful, professional conversations that will lead to progressive and sound outcomes, I think that's about our leaders demonstrating that's how we're going to do things.
Yeah, on that line, madam, if I can ask you one of the questions that have been popped up as well. If you are under racism or discrimination of some sort, you're a professional in the area. As a person, how can you react to such situations? And I'm not going to ask you whether you have personally gone through. I mean, it's I would say any one of you would have gone through some sort of a discrimination. So more than that, what we need to discuss is how can one face such discrimination or racism. On the other end, we try to get the legislations and things going, but on a personal level, how do we handle those things?
Absolutely. And I suspect that there are many people on this call who've faced discrimination of some sort, if not racism overtly. I will tell you a story because it links to how I think we ought to respond. And it was when I was about 5 or 6, I was walking from my primary school to my mother's office, and I was followed by a New Zealand European male in a suit, much older than I was, who started saying things like, "You don't belong here, this isn't your country." This was back, I mean, this would have been the early 90s at the time, or the late 80s possibly. And I always remember telling my mother, I finally plucked up the courage to tell her, I think a few days later, and she looked shocked initially, but then she said, "That poor man, just imagine what he's going through and what he's lived through, that he would say that to a 5-year-old." And for me, as 5 or 6 as I was at the time, I think it changed the way that I perceive issues like discrimination and racism, as opposed to something that simply happens to me. There's that saying that goes, every act has an ecology. And since my mother said that to me, I think whenever I've had any interaction where I've felt there's been an element of discrimination, either towards me or someone else, I've tried to unpack the why or the ecology that sits behind the act. Because often it's impossible to change behavior at face level, in my view. But if you unpack the ecology behind the act, like, what are we teaching kids at school? What's the family situation of these people growing up? Have they lost jobs to someone who's come in from overseas? What's the story that sits behind an act of discrimination? And I think not only is it more honest to assess those acts of discrimination, but there's more promise in terms of being able to change that sort of behaviour if we view things by looking at what is the ecology that sits behind an act.
Okay, yeah. So it's usually any kind of discrimination, it's the usual impulsive reaction. You got to go beyond it if you're a individual. That's what you mean. I mean, you got to see what he's also going through, right?
Absolutely. And I think if you're involved in systems change, so if you're a person who wants to lobby for change in policy or in law reform, or you're imagining a world in 20 years where discrimination either isn't happening or is happening to a much lesser extent, it requires you to think about what the ecology is as opposed to simply seeing that.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yes. So most of the youth here are really pretty much into activity in terms of community and leadership. So I think that they will find it really important, because it's the age of hormones and a lot of energy. So to look at problems in a proper way, it's really important. And since how have the roots from Sri Lanka helped you? That's another question, to grow up in your career.
Well, I've got to say the first thing is I've been missing Sri Lanka so much. So I know it's been really hard for many people and families separated all over the world with COVID. The last time we were there, we took our little boys, it would have been about 3 years ago. And so Sri Lanka is very much a part of where I call home. I call New Zealand home as well. Sri Lanka's history has been a huge part of the reason why I embarked on a career in human rights. And I think that sometimes when I speak about the situation in Sri Lanka, particularly for people who aren't Sri Lankans, they leave that interaction purely with a sense of crisis and a country that has been in crises for decades in different ways. But there is also a huge strength, a huge beauty, and in my view, is a wonderful peace that I feel when I'm back in Sri Lanka. And I think that is very much a sense of being tied to my ancestry there. A lot of the stories I grew up with were about my great-grandmother, Nason Salavanamuttu, and my great-grandfather, but also of my grandfather, who was a doctor there, of my other grandfather who did eye surgery and who reached out and often I believe, gave free treatment to people in Sri Lanka when he was a surgeon there. It's stories about my great-grandfather on the other side, who was the head of the Methodist Church. It's just stories of my mother and father meeting, and, you know, all those stories that form part of who you are very much with me, and very much what I hope to embed in my kids when we're able to come back and visit again.
Okay, that's really interesting, and definitely the smile that you have, it's totally Sri Lankan and would have helped you a lot. And the other question, one of the other questions, Rukshan, we have a question from Jaffna Gopi's question. Can you relay that in, please?
Sure.
வணக்கம், நான் யாழ்ப்பாணத்திலிருந்து கோபிநாத். இந்த வாய்ப்பை வழங்கிய ரொட்டேரியன்ஸ் அணியினருக்கு எனது முதற்கண் நன்றிகளை தெரிவித்துக் கொண்டு, இந்த சந்தர்ப்பத்தில் நியூசிலாந்து நாட்டின் பாராளுமன்ற உறுப்பினரான உங்களிடம் நான் கேட்க விரும்பும் கேள்வி யாதெனில், இன்றைய இளைஞர்களுக்கு நீங்கள் யாது கூற விரும்புகின்றீர்கள்? அதாவது அவர்களது எதிர்கால திட்டங்கள் மற்றும் நிதி சார்ந்த தேவைப்பாடுகளுக்கு உங்களால் வழங்கக்கூடிய அறிவுரைகள் யாவை?
Okay, thanks, Rukshan. So Gobi's general question is about how to face challenges. Let me put it this way. So when you hold your integrity, your values, you might not be in the environment where those are supported. You might be in an environment where you get challenged. So your ideas are challenged, your values are challenged. How do you guide yourself in that type of an environment? How do you face challenges, basically?
Thank you. I think that's a really important question for leadership as well as integrity. I think, unfortunately and fortunately, leaders tend to be those who do stand out and often don't share the views of people immediately around them. But it doesn't, of course, mean that they're wrong. And so I think what I would say is, do remember that it isn't about the circle of people around you believing exactly the same thing that you do. Do look for a tribe of people, whether it be online or in your broader community. Again, not necessarily people who agree with whatever your view is, but people who are comfortable having a conversation with you about your ideas, and people who you feel you're safe with in terms of challenging those ideas. So always remember, it's not about getting a group of people who always support exactly what you say. Even within our Labour team, for example, we have robust debates about some of the big issues, and that is healthy, and it's really fantastic to be able to do that. But you need to have a safe space to do that. One of the good things about the internet now is that you can find those spaces online as well. So find a group of people who you're able to have those discussions with. Yeah.
Okay. One final question, madam. Now, there's a lot of questions about education and how we can integrate integrity into education. How do you cultivate sort of an environment in your house, like your kids? How do you encourage them to adopt to a value system early on in their lives? And possibly in terms of New Zealand, what type of policies or procedures are there to bring in this type of education into the youth? That would be really helpful for our youth as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, so in the family, I think probably one of the things that I've been really strong on, and I mentioned it before, was trying to bring the children along with me when I can to attend events. But a lot of the events are discussions. So, for example, the women's rights event that I took them to was a discussion about women's empowerment, but also how we can get communities more broadly, women's communities, to support each other. So I'm keen for my children to have what I would call a background noise of human rights, for their norm to be knowing terminology about human rights, to be using it, for their norm to be hearing discussions about equality, gender equality, women's empowerment, for their norm to be walking through the halls of Parliament so that they feel that they have a voice that they should be able to share. In New Zealand, when we have sitting blocks, so when the parliamentarians are all in the House regularly, there are school tours that come through the House. And so this is children of all ages who come through the House and see their Parliament because it is their house. And we had in the Education and Workforce Committee, I think it wouldn't have been last week, but possibly the week before, there was a young person who came and submitted on a languages bill in front of the committee. So the idea is to feel very comfortable, for young people should feel very comfortable expressing their views at all levels of decision making in New Zealand. I do think we're fortunate in that we're a smaller country in terms of population over here, but it's something that we very much encourage. And the same in terms of sharing ideas around the dinner table and having, family meetings where people can canvass their views and their arguments. We've tried voting on various things, which has its pros and cons when you have 3 children and 2 adults, I can tell you. But it's the little things you do. And my eldest son is very much an environmentalist as well, and so holds me to account in terms of what the Labour Party are doing on that front. My view, beyond having children coming through the Parliament and feeling like it belongs to them, which it does, is that in all schools and across the world, really, we need a robust citizenship, ethics, cultural intelligence training program that's not just substantive, but that is active. So not just about learning in a classroom about what different cultures are like, but actively going into different religious facilities, talking to different religious elders, having an experience so it doesn't feel so foreign in terms of what your ordinary life is.
Okay, yeah. That speaks a lot. And one more final question. To people who wants to take a career in politics, young youth over here, what's your advice to them?
I'm wondering whether to be honest at this stage. So I'm going to say something controversial, and I'm going to say don't do it, but I don't mean don't do it. So what I mean is don't aim to be a politician. Don't aim to be a lawyer. Don't strive for the position. Decide what change that you would like to make in the world, and then find the position that excites you, that'll help you do that you're curious about. Again, I would echo the advice that I got when I would have been about 23 at the time, which is look at the challenges in the world, see the things that frustrate you, that really, that really drive you, that you're really passionate about. Look at the things that you're curious about, and then follow your head and your heart. Don't believe that you need to have a defined career in your 20s or even your 30s. Follow your head and your heart, and you'll find that you're doing the right thing where you go. And you won't be afraid to change titles or positions because you know that you'll be doing the good work.
Yes, okay. Yeah, you elaborated on this during your speech as well. Yes, head and the heart at the right place and focus on work, and the position will come. Right, so that I would conclude the set of questions that I have. I have plenty of questions, but I think most of them were answered during our session. Finally, as we discussed, Madam Walters, if you can tell these youth one thing that they can start from tomorrow morning to be in line with themselves in terms of what they do, and to be in line, or to take your position, to hold your values in front of in the environment which might challenge. So what sort of a daily practice that they can do to uphold their values?
I mean, I would suggest that it's really useful to write them down. because sometimes we use the term values and make an assumption that it means the same thing to all of us. And the truth is that values do mean different things to different people, and there's a different emphasis depending on the work you're doing, where you are in your life. So I'd say write them down. Don't write a terribly long list, but think about what is really important to you now. And then, after you do that, think about what you're doing in your life now and whether that echoes the values that you believe are really important to you. Revisit that from time to time. Don't be afraid to let your values live and to adapt the way you express them. But make time to do that. It doesn't take long. 10 or 15 minutes every 3 to 6 months can make a huge difference in what you choose to do. And the last thing I'd say is possibly not a piece of advice I've been given, but something that's made a difference for me, is there are points of fear that I think everyone has in their life when they're given certain opportunities, when we decide either to take them or not to. And there are often a bunch of reasons not to take on a really challenging opportunity. I would really urge people to carefully analyze why they're choosing no for certain things, because often, it opens a door to a whole range of new challenges and opportunities when you're willing to leap and overcome that fear. So I just challenge people to do that as long as the opportunity is in line with your values.
So that's great advice. Take an account of yourself, write them down, and follow them up. Yeah, so that's something you can do from today itself. So I hope that contribution, those efforts from Madam Walters would help you grow your life, and that would help all of us to grow our lives and take our lives to the next step, and thereby help our communities, help our countries, and help the entire globe. So with that, let us conclude this session. And to deliver the appreciation vote of thanks, I would like to invite Rotarian Marshad Bari.
Thank you very much, Mahima. It is indeed a great honor and privilege to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the Rotary Club of Colombo North in Rotary District 3220, Sri Lanka and Maldives. Topic today discussed by the speaker on youth and integrity has become very important in the globe as far as youth are concerned, because at a very crucial time like this, with the pandemic situation and economic crisis, it is indeed difficult task to maintain the integrity. But it is the challenge taken by our interactors, sponsored by Rotary in 150 countries, in 10,700 clubs and over 200,000 members all over the world. And for your information, first club in Sri Lanka, Interact Club in Sri Lanka, is St. John's College, Jaffna formed. And we have 256 such clubs in Sri Lanka. Also over 18 years old joined the Rotaract clubs, and we have Rotaract movement active in 180 countries in 10,968 clubs, including 300,000 members. They all focus on the four-way test of Rotary, which is a guide which says of the things we think, say, or do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendship? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? This is the four-way test in Rotary we follow. So this will help these youth involved in Rotary to maintain their integrity under any circumstance and any challenge. Also, Madam, we admire the leadership of Her Excellency, the President of the New Zealand, Jacinda Kate Laurel Ardern, 40th Prime Minister of your country from Mount Albert, who was a Prime Minister at 37 years old, who is the world's youngest female head of government and only the second to become a mother while still in office after Benazir Bhutto. And In 2007, Jacinta became the second woman ever elected president of the International Union of Socialist Youth, the world's largest international political youth organization. I take this opportunity to thank our speaker today, Honorable Vanushi Walters, who is coming from such an inspiring, youthful background, who made our country proud and inspire our youth, being the first and only Sri Lankan-born parliamentarian to be inducted to the Parliament of New Zealand. And she was the first Labour Party member to be elected for the Upper Harbour Street. And being a mother of 3 sons, I'm quite sure she will know better how to handle the youth and inspire them, as her speech today inspired the larger gathering from Sri Lanka and across the world. To be very honest, there are so many people are joining today from Serbia, USA, and I can't, 30, 40 countries listening to you today, madam. I also take this opportunity to thank the President Lucian Pereira and the Board of Rotary Club of Colombo North to support this great initiative, and our youth partners who continuously supporting this event, preparing themselves day and night. Yesterday, late night, we finished around 3 o'clock a.m. in the morning. President and the Board of Interact Club of Wesley College, Carey College, Interact Club of Colombo North, along with Rotary Club of Colombo North, Rotary Club of Sri Lanka, Rotary Club of University of Colombo, Faculty of Medicine, and Rotary Club of Imperial College. Thank you very much for all your efforts. One important person I wish to thank. Without him, this program would have not been a reality. The moment Honorable Vanushi was elected, I told him somehow get her on a program like this, and he obliged my suggestion and start working on it, and he made it today. Charter President of the Rotary Club of Sri Lanka and our Rotarian Mahima Veerasinghe, our heartiest thanks go to you for all your great efforts and moderating the session today. Once Martin Luther King Jr. said that if you are a street sweeper, so be it, but clean your street so well that others are forced to acknowledge your existence and feel that here live a street sweeper who did his job well. So we need to realize that often the job we do is out of our own choice. So best thing is to do it well. Thus, anything worth doing is worth doing passionately. So I wish all our youth organization who attend this meeting after listening to such inspiring speech will work passionately to make our Rotary movement and country proud one day, as Honorable Vanushi Walters did for us. Thank you so much. Also, I wish to thank our District Governor Ajit Veerasinghe, Governor-elect Aruni Mallasekara, Youth Service Chair Dr. Rohan Tatukorala, DICC Delvin Pereira, and Assistant District Secretary Champa Pereira for joining us today and encouraging this kind of initiative. Also, my special thanks to District Interact Representative Rahul Ferdinand and District Rotaract Representative Kasan Sigara for connecting the interactors and Rotaractors. Before I conclude, I have a very special request to Madam Vanushi Walters on behalf of our Rotary Governor for you to participate as the keynote speaker at our Rotary District Conference in a similar manner, which is to be held on 22nd of May, 2021, where there will be over 700 professionals and prominent businessmen of the country participating in it. We look forward for your positive response. I think Mahima can work it on it. And finally, I thank all who participated and supported this program a success. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, sir. Madam, you want to say something? You will.
Just to express my thanks again. Thank you so much. It's been a real joy speaking to you all, and again to the Colombo North Rotary Group, to Mashad, Mahima, to Lishan. Thank you for the warm welcome, and I've noted the invitation, so no doubt Mahima will follow that up with me.
Yeah, I do. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, madam. It has been a real pleasure. Have a good day. Take care.